Greetings, everyone, and welcome to We Are ACEDS, streaming live on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. My name is Mike Quartararo. I am the president of ACEDS. Today, we are going to be joined shortly by Matt Daimler, Senior Vice President and General Manager of Review Services at Haystack. Everyone in eDiscovery knows that document review is the most costly and time-consuming component of an eDiscovery project, and Haystack is among the top companies providing professional services in this area. So we wanted to spend a little time with Matt and hopefully bring some value, some knowledge, some tips to the ACEDS community. So let's get into it. Matt, thanks for making time today. Thanks for joining us. Hope you and yours are well.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Let's get into it. Let's start with Let's understand, for those who do not know, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your journey to where you are today, and your current role at Haystack.
Sure. So I've been in the eDiscovery business for probably 21 years now. Started in the eDiscovery area and soon moved over to a primary focus on document review. Probably about 14, 15 years ago, mostly on the sales side of the house, moved over with Haystack to actually run the review division going on 3 years ago now. So gave up my sales bag and now more of actually running the day-to-day of the review business.
And how did you get started in this? Like, what attracted? Like, people don't graduate from high school or college and say, "I'm going to go work in eDiscovery." How'd you get into it?
So I had my best friend at the time had opened up a traditional lit support, scan, blowback, copy shop, and finally convinced him to come over and help. And I worked there for about 7 months and decided I didn't like running around the streets with a cart and handing out brownies, hoping for a box to copy 3 times, and found a startup company called Purple Yogi, which soon turned into Stratify, and that was my first real entrance into eDiscovery.
Fascinating. Stratify. I believe an Iron Mountain company now, right?
Yes. So when we sold to Iron Mountain, me and the management of Iron Mountain had differences of opinions, and I decided to leave. And it's actually how I got involved in the review space. So at Stratify, we had a partnership with a company called De Novo, who was a review-only organization that wanted to open up a eDiscovery side of the house. So they were a partnership of mine at Stratify. Soon became and went over to help them start their eDiscovery division, and was over there until we sold to Epic after 4 or 5 years, something along those lines.
Yeah. No, familiar with all that. So let's get into the review space a little bit. It's kind of where you specialize. Matt, what are some of the, I don't know what the word for, challenges that you're seeing in the document review space right now? And how do you suggest our listeners deal with those challenges?
So it's an interesting question. And the review space, completely changed once COVID hit, where the traditional world of review was you opened up a brick and mortar review center at a particular location like DC, and you would sell review into that particular market. So once COVID hit, everyone in the review space either had to shut down and go out of business, or pivot and turn into a remote review company and try to figure out what the challenges of managing people remotely were versus being able to walk into a brick and mortar location and actually be able to manage the attorneys. So that obviously is something that the industry has had to deal with over the last 2 years. But there's now new changes coming, right, with the constant evolution of tech. And at Legal Week in 2 weeks, I'm sure everyone is going to want to be talking about ChatGPT, which is something that's so new. But depending upon who you talk to and depending upon what kind of side you go on that wall, is it's going to completely change both the e-discovery business, but then also the review business. Now, Mike, you and I have been in this business long enough. We've heard this, every 4 or 5 years, there's some kind of new tech that comes in that says, okay, right, it's going to completely put service providers out of business. Hasn't happened yet. I don't think it's going to happen with chat, even though it might, continue to evolve the business.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, I have some opinions on it. I should probably keep them to myself for now. But,
Ditto.
But I mean, I don't see it substantially altering, the current processes in the strict sense. There's a way to look at documents, review documents. Certainly, technology can be used to enhance that process, but I don't see the process. I mean, it's not going to go away. Just like AI is not going to replace lawyers. It's not happening. So interesting segue into some of, I mean, Haystack's been at the forefront of doc review for a long time. What are you guys doing in terms of innovation and technology? Are there any new developments in doc review from a technology perspective that our listeners should be aware of or be on the lookout for, aside from, the large language models and
yeah. So, I mean, from a conceptual mindset perspective, right, where we are a little bit, or at least we were a little bit differently. I still think we are, as kind of the first company that ventured into the remote business, going on 10 years ago, where I firmly believed then and believe now that document review is a skill set. It's not just that somebody went to law school and passed the bar that they can now review documents. So what we really try to do is to build technology, use technology to ultimately allow us to make sure that the attorneys that we're staffing on our projects are attorneys that absolutely can review documents effectively and quickly, but then also to use technology and our recruiting team to ultimately staff attorneys on a subject matter expertise perspective, which is something I've never done in my past, where a corporation doesn't just go to the same attorney to review their antitrust matters and their security litigation matters and their employment matters. Right, law firms are structured in a way where they've got different divisions that focus on different subject matter. We want to do the same thing, and I think that there's other new technologies that are coming out that are trying to, really assist in the recruiting of personnel that meet certain criteria versus just the old mentality that a button seat is all you need to do from review. And you can figure it out from a QC or a review management perspective before it ultimately goes to outside counsel.
So, and that's great. I get it. You're making sure the right person is in the right place at the right time, right? And that makes perfect sense. But what role does, how important is technology to this process? Does it matter what technology you're using? The review platform. I'm a big fan of project management. Is there someone sort of, driving the metrics, the dashboard, and doing the project work that sort of drives doc review? How important is technology to this process?
So technology from the kind of data side, right? It's imperative, and it's no longer where relativity has such a stranglehold on the market, and that's really the only product that people are using. right? So as an organization, we have to have multiple different applications to use dependent upon what ultimately needs to happen for that particular matter. Whether it's, the different service provider, or it's, we're using CAL or TAR 1.0 versus TAR 2.0. The reality is that that technology from an AI perspective is used 99.9% of the matters that come into my review division, to allow us to, as close to as possible, say the eyes that I'm going to put an attorney on are as close to the eyes that need to have attorneys on that we can possibly state. And if you think of like a antitrust matter where you used to have 600, 700 attorneys on that and reviewing tens of millions of documents, an antitrust matter is really turned into now a privilege review. It's not the 20, 30 million documents anymore. It's how do I use as much technology as possible, ultimately, to make sure that what I push over to whatever government agency that I'm going to push it to, I am confident that I'm dealing with a privilege component and not necessarily responsive, not responsive perspective.
I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about managed review, because I think a lot of people aren't aware of what managed review services are. There's document review, there's managed review services. Give us a quick 30 seconds on the difference between folks doing just sort of traditional doc review and managed review services.
Perfect. So I would classify as a traditional document review as really kind of a staffing, arm of counsel, right? And counsel kind of really takes over the management component, right? The QC, and ultimately setting up what the attorneys are going to go through. Managed review is really where you have to have high-level consultants and review managers that are really working hand in hand as a partnership with counsel to figure out what is the end goal of a matter, right? And ultimately, what are we trying to do? What have we agreed to with plaintiff or whatever particular agency we're dealing with, and to continually update, right, and work hand in hand to make sure that if we're starting to see a bunch of documents that we're reviewing with a not responsive component, that we can do on the fly different searches and different functionality to ultimately continuously pull out those not responsive documents, right? And really look at a steward of the corporate client and make sure that every dollar they spend is a dollar they should spend. So it's a continually updating and partnership with counsel to make sure that, again, we're only reviewing the documents that we can all honestly say is the documents that we should be reviewing for as much as we possibly can.
And so in a related vein, we've seen a lot over the course of certainly our careers. Everyone has seen this, a lot of change in pricing models in the review space. Can you explain how managed review services are priced, what factors are considered in determining that price, and sort of how that's evolved over the years?
Sure. And obviously I can just speak to how, we price things, but pricing is completely across the board, right? Where you still have, the request just to your traditional hourly model, right? So you'll have your first level reviewer priced at X, you'll have your QC priced at Y, and your review management priced at Z. We're having more and more where either the law firm or the corporate client wants us to kind of think outside the box, right? So whether it's a all in, everything done from a per document perspective, or we're seeing more and more where they want us to do a blended number, right? So give me a number per hour that incorporates everything you'll do, whether it's first level, QC, review management, redactions, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're seeing more with some of these, high-end litigation-heavy organizations, where they'll have us go through and do these RFPs, where they'll give us a snapshot of their last 2 years in terms of their review breakdown and their litigation breakdown in terms of how that came into play from the last 2 year snapshot. And they want us to ultimately price things from a flat perspective based on their last 2 year averages. So we're seeing that more and more. We're also seeing, again, certain organizations come to us and say, listen, we want you, right, to put skin in the game. So we want a hourly model and a per doc model, and we want you ultimately to give us whatever one ends up cheaper at the end of a review. So pricing right now is so across the board. And this is English based, right, and US based. Once you start to get into the overseas, whether it's EU, UK, Asia market, you're starting to talk about the different languages that come into play. That's a whole nother ball game, because again, languages can vary so much from a day-to-day perspective. For instance, Japanese, right? What you might get that those attorneys agree to on a Monday could be completely different on a Friday. So you got to be continually looking at what the market is on a language perspective. And now with the kind of the biggest growing market, at least that we're seeing, is in cyber. And cyber is not kind of your traditional litigation reviews, right, where they want to have not attorneys go through and work on their projects. So whether it's a paralegal, whether it's somebody who's got a deep bench in terms of Excel experiences and PowerPoint experiences, so they can actually go through and do all of the high-level work that needs to happen from a data extraction perspective from a cyber, right? So obviously our cyber projects are priced differently than our litigation reviews, where we have to have bar-admitted attorneys.
Got it. So well, a perfect segue, honestly, because my last question today was going to be about data privacy and cybersecurity. So how are you addressing issues related to things like data privacy, PII? I mean, you mentioned cybersecurity reviews as sort of a subset of document review, different kind of document review. How are you managing these things during the doc review process?
Great question. So we implemented probably about 10 years ago the ability to use very high-level Citrix-esque type technology to allow us to control every aspect of what one of our document review attorneys can access in terms of client data. And there's kind of different levels of the security that we can implement, right? So we can control, what email, who they can send emails to, who they can't send emails to. We can control download, print functionality, screen capture, that kind of websites that they can go onto. There's also new technology on the very important matters where the end client might want to, control who can see what. So we use facial recognition, where you have to take a picture on your phone and then log in using that to make sure that who's logging into the system is who's supposed to log into the system. The camera will actually make sure that you're constantly looking at documents. If there's multiple people that come in to a screen, it will black out. If someone tries to take a picture of a screen, it will black out. So there's multiple different levels of security that we can implement to make sure that ultimately the client's data is secure. Then what we also do is, right, again, these are for the most part attorneys, right? So we have built very extensive work from home agreements that these attorneys have to agree to in terms of what technology they have. You can't use Alexa and things along those lines, right? So we've really spent a lot of time just making sure that our attorneys' home office as secure as it possibly can be, right? Then it goes into, when we're doing, PII and PHI reviews and things along those lines, right? It just depends on where we're reviewing, right? Obviously, the EU and UK are completely different than what we have to do in the States, right? So just understanding ultimately what the governing laws are, and making sure that everyone that's working through and on one of our projects understands what their responsibilities are, both from a workflow perspective, but then also to make sure that we're trusting what they're going to do, but we're also verifying what they can do in terms of a security perspective.
That's awesome. Good to hear you doing all those things. We're almost at time, Matt. But before we go, anything new and interesting you want to share with the audience today?
No, I think that from our day to day, it's a constant work in progress in terms of making sure that we understand the governing laws, right? From a country to country perspective, from a state to state perspective. There's more and more states that are now implementing their own rules and laws, whether it be from a barred status, right? So got to be barred in the state that you're working in perspective, or whether it is, from a, overtime perspective. So there's a lot of things that we have to have kind of a full-time team that continually goes through and monitors ultimately what we can do from a state to state perspective, because again, now that we're in a remote review world, we can have, attorneys in theory review from every state in the country on one particular matter. And you have to ultimately understand, right? Are you abiding by the laws in that particular state to make sure that, again, everyone's doing what they need to be doing to make sure that you're ultimately not in a position where you're not doing what you need to be doing for those particular employees.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt. This has been great. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, everyone, for listening. If you want to learn more about Haystack, their services, what Matt does, go to HaystackID.com. If you are interested in our short form video interviews like this one, you can find We Are ACEDS live in your LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook feeds, or check out the ACEDS YouTube channel where you can watch previous interviews and live stream. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Haystack. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today.
Thanks, Mike.